The air in Thaddeus Boyd's 16th floor Preston Center office smelled of expensive mahogany and cheap panic. My palms pressed hard against the cold Carrara marble floor. I let my shoulders shake. I let the tears spill, hot and heavy, onto the sleek leather-bound folder holding the global property settlement. "Please," I choked out, looking up at Meredith. Her face was a mask of expensive Botox and pure, unadulterated contempt. Next to her, Garrick leaned against the floor-to-ceiling glass, swirling a glass of neat bourbon, his Italian loafers leaving greasy smudges on the walnut baseboards. "Meredith." "Garrick, please. It's the last piece of Dad. Just let me keep the West Texas dirt. I won't touch the Dallas commercial tracts. I'll sign everything else away. I just need a place to breathe, to heal." A sharp, deafening pop cut through my begging. Thaddeus Boyd, a legal mercenary in a $3,000 bespoke suit, had just killed a bottle of Dom Perignon. Foam hissed over his manicured thumbs. He let out a booming gutter-level laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Congratulations, Meredith." "Garrick," Boyd shouted, pouring the frothing liquid into 3 crystal flutes. "Gideon Vance's little empire is officially yours. Every single brick. And as for you, Sloane." He looked down at me, his eyes dead as a shark's. "You just signed your own financial death warrant. You're officially broke. Pack your bags and get the hell out of our sight." Listen to me carefully. That was the girl on the floor. That was the version of me they thought they had broken. People on the internet love to consume cheap revenge stories about greedy heirs getting what they deserve, treating it like a Hollywood script with a tidy moral ending. But out here in the real world, in the brutal, unforgiving mechanism of Texas estate law, true retribution isn't a shouting match. It's a surgical strike. It's a game of pennies, fine print, and absolute emotional detachment. It's letting your enemies believe they have ripped the flesh from your bones, right up until the moment they realize they've swallowed a mouthful of razor blades. They thought they were the predators. They didn't realize my tears were just lubricant for the trap. My father, Gideon Vance, didn't build his fortune with a silver spoon. He built it with grit, asphalt, and the kind of hard-nosed negotiation that leaves permanent scars on everyone across the table. He was an industrial real estate titan in North Texas. If there was a warehouse district, an intermodal logistics hub, or a massive commercial strip being poured near I-35, odds were Gideon owned the dirt beneath it. My mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 12. After her death, Dad threw himself into his work, leaving just the 2 of us in a sprawling, echoing estate in Highland Park. I grew up in his shadow, learning the language of deeds, easements, and title insurance before I even had a driver's license. I was his daughter, his apprentice, and his undisputed heir. Until Meredith walked into our lives. Meredith was a luxury predator disguised as a grieving country club widow. She had the kind of brittle, curated elegance that appeals to aging tycoons who are too tired to look past the surface. She married my father within 6 months of their first meeting at a charity gala. Along with her came Garrick, her 22-year-old son from a previous marriage she preferred not to talk about. Garrick was a spoiled, volatile parasite who treated my father's wealth as his personal piggy bank. He drove foreign cars he couldn't afford, frequented high-stakes underground poker games in Uptown, and viewed me as an obstacle to the lifestyle he felt entitled to. Meredith was smart. She didn't launch an open war against me. Instead, she practiced a slow, calculated erosion. A whispered complaint to my father about my defiance. A misplaced financial report that made me look incompetent. She slowly poisoned the well, creating a wedge between a father who was growing increasingly fragile and a daughter who refused to play nice with the invaders. But Dad still trusted my mind. He knew I had his stomach for business. He knew Garrick was an idiot. So Meredith changed her strategy from manipulation to elimination. It happened on a slick, rain-drenched Thursday night in November. I was leaving a corporate dinner downtown when Garrick cornered me in the parking garage. He was erratic, his eyes dilated, smelling of expensive gin and cheap sweat. He had lost $40,000 to a bookmaker and needed me to authorize a corporate wire transfer from my father's secondary account. I refused. Bluntly. I got into my sedan. Garrick, completely unhinged, hopped into his heavy Mercedes SUV and followed me. On the winding, treacherous curves of Turtle Creek Boulevard, he pulled alongside me, screaming through his open window, ramming his vehicle into my driver's side door. The impact was deafening, metal groaning against metal. My car spun out of control, sheared through a guardrail, and wrapped around an old oak tree. The steering column crushed my right leg. Through the cracked windshield under the flashing yellow streetlights, I saw Garrick's taillights vanish into the dark. He didn't even tap his brakes. The police report was a masterpiece of corruption. By the time I woke up from a 6-hour orthopedic surgery, Meredith had already utilized Thaddeus Boyd, the family's newly retained corporate counsel, to scrub the scene. The cameras near the creek magically malfunctioned. A phantom witness claimed a black pickup truck had cut me off. Garrick had an alibi provided by his mother. I was left with 3 steel pins in my femur, a shattered knee, and a permanent, agonizing limp. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the nightmare waiting for me outside the recovery room. While I was pinned to a hospital bed, pumped full of heavy narcotics and unable to move, my father suffered a catastrophic ischemic stroke. The timing was too perfect, too convenient to be purely biological. He was rushed to the medical center, completely incapacitated, unable to speak or move the right side of his body. I begged the nurses to wheel my bed to his room. Meredith blocked me at the door. Flanked by 2 private security guards she had hired using my father's corporate credit card. She told the hospital staff I was emotionally unstable due to my accident medications. For 4 days they kept my father isolated. On the 5th night, Thaddeus Boyd entered his room with a portable notary public and a stack of legal documents. It was an amendment to the Vance Family Inter Vivos Trust. My father was heavily sedated on palliative care drugs, barely conscious. Boyd placed a pen in his trembling, paralyzed left hand, guided his fingers and forced a jagged mark onto the signature line. With that single stroke of a pen, 30 years of my father's labor was rerouted. The original estate plan, which left 60% of the assets to me and 40% to a charitable foundation, was obliterated. The new document named Meredith as the sole trustee with absolute power of appointment. Garrick was named the primary beneficiary of the commercial real estate portfolio. 2 hours later, my father's heart stopped. The funeral was a curated performance of high society grief. Meredith wore a black lace veil that hid her dry eyes. Garrick stood beside her in a tailored charcoal suit, looking like a prince who had just inherited his kingdom. I stood 30 yards away, leaning heavily on a cold aluminum cane, my leg throbbing in the Texas humidity. Not a single associate of my father looked me in the eye. In Dallas, when the money shifts, the loyalty shifts with it. The next morning, Boyd called me to the estate office. There was no warmth, no condolences. He handed me a 3-page eviction notice. "The trust owns the Highland Park house, Sloane," Boyd said, his voice flat and clinical. "Meredith has decided to liquidate the property. Your corporate email has been deactivated, and your position at Vance Development is terminated. You have 48 hours to clear your personal belongings." And my father's personal effects? His journals? His watches? I asked, my voice cracking. Meredith stepped out from behind the mahogany door, her fingers dripping with my mother's vintage diamond rings. "Those belong to the estate now, Sloane. Be glad we're leaving you anything at all. What they left me was a joke. A calculated insult designed to ensure I could never afford the legal fees to fight them." Deep in the boilerplate text of the revised trust was a specific bequest to me. A 200-acre parcel of land in Terrell County, out near the ghost town of Sanderson in West Texas. It was a barren, sun-bleached expanse of limestone, scrub brush and rattlesnakes. My grandfather had bought it in the 1950s for pennies, thinking there was oil. There wasn't. It was a liability, accumulating thousands of dollars in delinquent county property taxes every year. That afternoon, I went back to the cemetery alone. The workers were already filling the grave with dry Texas dirt. Garrick was waiting by his sports car near the iron gates, smoking a cigarette. As I limped past him, he spat onto the gravel. "Hey, Gimp," he called out, his voice dripping with malice. "Have fun out in the desert. Maybe you can lease that dirt to the vultures. If you ever come back to Dallas looking for a handout, I'll have security throw you in the street. You're nothing now. Just a broke cripple living on a pile of rocks." I didn't answer him. I didn't look back. I got into my dented 10-year-old SUV. the only asset they couldn't touch because the title was solely in my name, and drove away. My leg burned. My throat was tight with a rage so pure it felt like liquid iron in my veins. They thought they had stripped me bare. They thought they had left me with nothing but a broken body and a worthless patch of desert sand. What the parasites and their high-priced lawyer didn't realize was that I still possessed the one thing they could never steal, because they didn't have the brains to understand its value. I had my father's mind, and I knew exactly how to use their own insatiable greed to slit their financial throats. The cheap vinyl mattress at the Motel 6, off Interstate 20, smelled of stale tobacco and industrial bleach. Every 3 minutes, the wall unit rattled like a bucket of loose bolts, blowing a stream of lukewarm air across my swollen right knee. I didn't take the hydrocodone the hospital had prescribed. I needed the pain. It was a rhythmic, white-hot reminder of the debt owed to me. On the laminate table sat a battered leather briefcase. It didn't belong to Vance Development. It was my father's private lockbox, the one he kept bolted under the floorboards of his hunting cabin in Llano. Meredith didn't even know the cabin existed. She had always refused to step foot anywhere that lacked central air and a concierge. Inside that briefcase lay 30 years of handwritten ledgers, unrecorded options, and personal field notes. My father didn't trust computers for his realist plays. He trusted ink. I spent 4 days staring at a map of the Texas Gulf Coast, specifically a 50-acre commercial tract just outside the port of Houston. Vance Development had held it since 1979. To the uninitiated legal eye, including Thaddeus Boyd's, it was the crown jewel of the estate, valued at $30 million because of a planned deepwater terminal expansion. But I knew the dirt. I called Wyatt Miller. Wyatt was 71, lived on a diet of black coffee and filtered Lucky Strikes, and had spent 34 years as a field investigator for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality before my father hired him as a private consultant. He met me at a diner in East Austin where the grease on the grill was older than both of us. Wyatt didn't say he was sorry about my dad. He just looked at my aluminum cane, grunted, and dropped a heavy manila folder on the Formica table. "Your old man knew this storm was coming, Sloane," Wyatt said, his voice like gravel being crushed under a boot. "He just didn't think he'd die before the sky fell." I opened the folder. The documents were stamped confidential, subject to enforcement review. It was a preliminary assessment from the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 6 office. From 1982 to 1989, Vance Development leased those 50 coastal acres to Caltech's chemical processing, I said, reading the fine print. My fingers traced the chemical symbols. They weren't just storing solvents. They were dumping. Worse, Wyatt spat, leaning in. They were injecting chlorinated hydrocarbons and PFAS directly into the shallow aquifer. The clay liner cracked around 94. Right now there's a plume of benzene 5 times the size of the Astrodome migrating toward the municipal water intake line. The EPA has been running silent core drills for 18 months. They've finalized the Superfund designation under CERCLA. When does the hammer drop? The formal administrative order is sitting on the regional director's desk in Dallas. It gets signed and published on the Federal Register next Tuesday at exactly 4 o'clock. Whoever holds the deed at that precise second is trapped under strict joint and several liability. The estimated remediation cost. Wyatt paused, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. $45 million minimum. And because Vance Development filed fraudulent compliance certificates back in the 90s, the Department of Justice is attached. The current officers of the owning entity won't just go broke, Sloane. They're going to federal prison in Beaumont. A cold, hard satisfaction settled deep in my chest. Meredith and Garrick were so blinded by the $30 million appraisal that they hadn't run a fresh environmental Phase 1 study. They relied on Boyd's outdated title insurance policies from 10 years ago. They were about to inherit an active volcano, and they were planning to build a castle on top of it. But the trap needed a counterweight. A predator won't reach into the jaws of a vice unless the bait is fat enough. The next morning I drove 6 hours west, past San Angelo, where the green Texas hills flatten into a brutal, sun-bleached expanse of limestone and creosote brush. Terrell County, Sanderson, Texas. Population, barely 700. The 200 acres my grandfather left me sat 12 miles outside town off a caliche road that chewed through my tires. It looked like the surface of the moon, dry, cracked, and completely worthless. But 3 weeks before his stroke, my father had received a certified letter from an outfit called Vanguard Battery Materials, operating under a shell corporation named Transpecos Holdings LLC. I arranged to meet their lead acquisitions officer, a man named Donald Mercer, at a Denny's off the highway in Midland. Mercer was a corporate suit who looked entirely out of place in West Texas oil country. His hands soft and his tie perfectly knotted. "Ms. Vance," Mercer said, sliding a non-disclosure agreement across the table before I could even sit down. "We've been trying to reach your father's legal representatives for 2 months. A GA named Boyd kept blocking our calls, told us the family wasn't interested in selling worthless rocks while the estate was in probate." "Boyd doesn't represent me," I said, signing the NDA without blinking. "What did your core samples find, Mr. Mercer?" Mercer took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the near-empty restaurant. "Your grandfather bought that land because he thought there was oil in the Ellenboga Formation. There wasn't. But beneath the dry limestone at about 4,000 feet lies a massive closed basin sala, a subterranean brine lake. The lithium concentration in those water samples is higher than the deposits in the Atacama Desert in Chile." He tapped a finger on a geological chart. "Vanguard is building a $5 billion gigafactory outside Austin. We need domestic lithium supply, and we need it yesterday. If we buy the mineral rights from you, we can bypass the entire global supply chain." "What's your number?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat, entirely clinical. "We are prepared to offer $85 million for an exclusive 99-year extraction lease," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But our board has a strict condition. We cannot have a bidding war with Albemarle or Rio Tinto. This deal must remain completely confidential until the title is cleared and registered in your name. If the market gets wind of this, the surrounding land prices will skyrocket, and our project dies." "You'll have your clean title," I told him. "But I need 72 hours. And I need your legal team to prepare the escrow account under an anonymous blind trust." Mercer smiled, thinking he had found an easy mark. "We can do that, Ms. Vance. Just don't take too long. Capital moves fast." As I walked back to my SUV, my cane sinking slightly into the soft, melting asphalt of the parking lot, the pieces of the puzzle locked into place with a heavy, satisfying click. I didn't go to a prestigious firm in downtown Dallas to draw up the papers. Thaddeus Boyd had spies in every white shoe office along Ross Avenue. Instead, I drove to a crumbling strip mall in Arlington, sandwiched between a discount tire shop and a panaderia. Gabe Mitchell was sitting behind a metal desk covered in empty Dr. Pepper cans and old motions for bankruptcy. Gabe had been my classmate at UT Law before he got chewed up by a bad divorce and an even worse drinking habit. He was broke, cynical, and owed my father a favor from 10 years ago that had kept him from being disbarred. "This is crazy, Sloane," Gabe said, squinting through his cracked reading glasses at the draft I had written on a yellow legal pad. "What you're asking for isn't a standard property settlement. It's a landmine wrapped in a legal release. Can you draft it so it looks like a standard, desperate surrender?" I asked, leaning my weight against his desk. Gabe rubbed his stubble, his fingers stained with blue ink. "Let's look at the mechanics. You want a comprehensive land sale and liability transfer contract. Section 4 states you are surrendering all current and future claims to the 50-acre Houston commercial tract, any shares in Vance Development, and the Highland Park residence. In exchange, you take sole ownership of the Terrell County tract, plus a cash payment of $100,000 from the corporate reserve for medical and relocation expenses." "That's the bait," I muttered. "Boyd will look at that $100,000 and think he's bought my silence for pennies. He knows I have medical bills from the accident. He thinks I'm drowning." "But look at Section 9, Clause B," Gabe said, tapping the paper with his pen. "This is where the razor blade is hidden. The transferee, meaning Meredith and Garrick's trust, expressly assumes all operational, historical, and latent liabilities, environmental or otherwise, associated with the Houston asset, holding the transferor entirely harmless from any administrative, civil, or criminal enforcement actions arising from the historical use of said property." "Sloane, this language is tight, but it's buried under 4 pages of boilerplate estate tax disclosures and standard corporate indemnification verbiage. If Boyd actually reads this with a fine-tooth comb. He won't, I interrupted. Boyd is a corporate transactional lawyer who hasn't stepped into a courtroom in 15 years. He handles mergers, acquisitions, and wealthy divorces. He's arrogant, Gabe. He thinks I'm a broken, crippled girl who just lost her father and is terrified of going broke. He thinks he's already won. And if he signs? If he signs and Meredith and Garrick sign as the sole managing officers of the trust, they legally absorb the Caltech's toxic plume before the EPA publishes the order. They won't just lose the $30 million value of the land. They will be legally required to pay the $45 million cleanup cost out of their own personal pockets because the contract specifically prevents them from using corporate bankruptcy to shield their personal assets from this specific liability. Gabe let out a low whistling breath. He looked at me, a mixture of fear and profound respect in his bloodshot eyes. And your West Texas land? The minute their ink is dry, Vanguard clears the escrow. $85 million drops into my account, entirely free and clear of the Vance estate probate. Gabe stood up, walked over to an old metal filing cabinet, and pulled out a fresh sheet of heavy bond paper. Give me 3 hours, Sloane. I'll make this look like the most pathetic, submissive legal surrender a broke heir has ever signed. I'll format it using the old 2012 Texas State Bar templates. Boyd will look at the font and assume some low-rent storefront lawyer wrote it for $500. Make it look like I'm begging Gabe, I said, my voice cold as stone. Make it look like I'm giving up everything just to survive. When I left his office later that afternoon, the sun was setting over the concrete sprawl of Dallas, casting long bloody shadows across the highway. My leg was aching terribly, a dull grinding throb that went all the way up to my hip. I didn't care. The stage was set. The bait was laid. I knew exactly how Meredith and Garrick operated. If you offer a wolf a piece of meat, it will bite. If you offer a pig a trough of gold, it will shove its entire head into the muck without ever looking up to see who's holding the axe. I picked up my phone and dialed Thaddeus Boyd's direct office line. When his secretary answered, I let my voice drop, letting it shake just enough to sound like a woman who had finally reached the absolute end of her rope. Tell Thaddeus it's Sloane, I whispered into the receiver. Tell him I can't do this anymore. I'll sign the settlement. I just want it over with. The glass doors of Boyd and Associates on the 16th floor didn't swing. They glided on silent oil tracks. The air inside was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling of lemon-scented beeswax and the distinct metallic tang of central air conditioning. I stepped onto the thick, cream-colored wool carpet, my right boot dragging, creating a dull rhythmic scritch thud alongside the sharp metallic click of my aluminum cane. The receptionist looked up. She was 20-something, with perfect hair and a tiny diamond studs in her earlobes. For a fraction of a second, her eyes flicked to my oversized, faded gray college sweatshirt, my scuffed flats, and the bare, pale skin of my face. I hadn't slept in 36 hours, and I hadn't tried to hide it. I had used a gray eyeshadow stick to darken the hollows under my eyes, making my cheekbones look sharp, brittle, and desperate. The pity in her expression was instantaneous. Good. Pity is the first cousin of blindness. They're waiting for you in the main conference room, Ms. Vance, she whispered, her voice dropping into that hushed tone people reserve for funerals or bankruptcies. I nodded, keeping my chin low, letting a strand of unwashed hair fall across my cheek. I pushed open the double mahogany doors. The room was a theater of absolute dominance. Thaddeus Boyd sat at the head of a 12-foot Carrara marble table, his bespoke charcoal suit immaculate, a gold Mont Blanc pen balanced between his manicured fingers. To his right sat Meredith. She was wearing a cream-knit Chanel dress, her neck draped in the South Sea pearls my father had bought her for their 3rd anniversary. Her posture was rigid, triumphant, her lips painted a glossy, sharp crimson. Next to her, Garrick leaned against the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the Dallas skyline. He was swirling a glass of neat bourbon, the ice clinking against the crystal with a small mocking chime. He wore a brand-new Rolex Submariner, my father's watch. Nobody stood up. Nobody offered me a chair. You're late, Sloane, Boyd said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of mercy. He didn't look at his watch. He looked through me. The traffic on I-35. My leg. I let my voice trail off, pitching it high and breathless. I pulled out a heavy leather chair 3 slots down from them, sinking into it with a small involuntary groan of simulated pain. I rested my cane against the marble table. It slipped, clattering loudly against the stone before hitting the carpet. Garrick let out a short, wet laugh from the window. Jesus, Sloane. Look at yourself. You look like a stray dog begging for scraps outside a steakhouse. Garrick, please, Meredith said, though her eyes were shining with cruel satisfaction. She leaned forward, resting her diamond-clad fingers on the marble. Let's just get this over with. I have an appointment at Neiman Marcus at 5. Boyd slid a thick white folder across the smooth stone. It stopped exactly 3 inches from my trembling hands. This is the final, non-negotiable settlement agreement from the Vance Family Trust. Under the terms, you acknowledge the validity of the November codicil. You waive all rights to contest the probate. You release Meredith and Garrick from any claims of undue influence. And you vacate all corporate positions effective immediately. In return, the estate agrees not to pursue you for the back taxes on the Terrell County property. I looked down at the document. My hands were shaking. Partly from the adrenaline of the trap, partly from the sheer raw disgust of being in the same room as the monster who had run me off the road. And the money? I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the desk. The 100,000? The bills from the hospital? The physical therapy? They're threatening to send me to collections. Boyd smiled. It was the smile of a timber wolf watching a deer bleed out in the snow. The $100,000 is a discretionary gift from Meredith. It will be disbursed only after you sign the global release, the quitclaim deeds for the Dallas warehouses, and the transfer certificates for the Houston port tract. I let out a shaky, shuddering breath. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out a crinkled, slightly stained manila envelope. The logo in the corner read Mitchell & Associates, Attorneys at Law, Arlington, Texas. It looked cheap. It looked like a storefront operation that handled traffic tickets and minor drug possession. My lawyer, Gabe, I stammered, sliding the document toward Boyd. He said if I'm giving up $30 million worth of commercial land in Houston, I need some protection. He wrote an amendment. A property swap. Boyd didn't even pick up his Mont Blanc. He used the tip of his finger to spin the document around. He glanced at the typeface, the old standard state bar format Gabe had intentionally chosen. A sneer touched the corner of his mouth. Mitchell, Boyd murmured, his tone dripping with Ivy League condescension. Is that the fellow who operates out of a strip mall next to a tire shop? Sloane, you're paying a street-level hustler to advise you on a multi-million-dollar estate. He's a friend of Dad's. I cried out, my voice cracking perfectly right on cue. I stood up, or rather I pushed myself up, leaning heavily on the table, my right leg buckling slightly. Please, Thaddeus. I'm not trying to fight you. Look at me. I can't walk without pain. I don't have a home. You took my car, you took my job. I just want to go to West Texas and be left alone. Gabe said this contract just legalizes the swap. I give you 100% of the Houston commercial tract, no strings attached, and you give me the Terrell County deed and the $100,000 today. That's all I want. Meredith looked at Boyd, a tiny flicker of nervousness in her eyes. Thaddeus? Is there anything in there that blocks the sale to the logistics group? Boyd flipped through the 4 pages of Gabe's document. His eyes scanned the text at corporate speed. He was looking for the big-ticket items, the waiver of rights, the cash amount, the description of the properties. He saw Section 4, transferor surrenders all right, title and interest in the 50-acre Harris County commercial tract. He smiled. He kept reading, his eyes skipping right over the long, dense paragraphs of boilerplate text in Section 9. He saw the words, operational, historical, and latent liabilities, holding the transferor entirely harmless. To Boyd's arrogant, overconfident brain, this was standard language used by small-time lawyers trying to protect their broke clients from future estate tax audits or minor code violations. He didn't know about Caltech's chemical. He didn't know about the quiet core drills the EPA had been sinking into that coastal mud for 18 months. He didn't know that the word liability, in this specific document, carried a $45 million price tag and a federal prison sentence. It's standard storefront fluff, Meredith, Boyd whispered, leaning across the back of her chair. his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who believed he was the smartest person in every room. "The girl is terrified. She's drowning in medical debt. Her lawyer wrote a messy, kitchen sink indemnity clause to make himself look useful, but it doesn't touch our title or our ability to close with the buyers next week. She's giving up $30 million to get $100,000 and a pile of dirt that costs $6,000 a year in property taxes. Sign it. Sign it before she realizes how badly she's getting screwed." Garrick walked over from the window, slamming his empty bourbon glass onto the table with a sharp, echoing crack. "Yeah, sign the damn thing. I'm tired of looking at her. She smells like a free clinic." Meredith picked up the gold pen. With 2 swift, elegant strokes, she signed her name as sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust. Garrick followed, his signature a sloppy, aggressive scrawl. Boyd turned the pages toward me. He tapped the sticky yellow sign here flag with his fingernail. "Your turn, Sloane. Sign, and my secretary will hand you a cashier's check for the $100,000. Refuse, and we file the motion for full probate exclusion in an hour, and you won't see a dime for the next 5 years." I sank back into my chair. I let a sob escape my throat, a real gasping sound that came from the absolute horror of realizing how close I was to the edge of the cliff. I picked up the cheap plastic ballpoint pen Gabe had given me. My fingers were slick with sweat. I dragged the paper toward me, my head bowed so low my hair hid my face. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I signed 3 copies. The notary public, an older woman with a bored expression who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stepped forward. She stamped each page with a heavy metallic thud clunk, the sound of a trap snapping shut. The second the third page was stamped, Thaddeus Boyd stood up. The professional, cold mask evaporated, replaced by a loud, boisterous explosion of victory. He walked over to the small mirrored wet bar in the corner of the office. He pulled a green chilled bottle of Dom Perignon from the Sub-Zero refrigerator. With a sharp, deafening pop, the cork flew out, striking the mahogany paneling. White foam hissed over his thumbs, dripping onto the sleek marble floor. "Congratulations, Meredith." "Garrick," Boyd shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls as he poured the frothing liquid into 3 crystal flutes. "Gideon Vance's little empire is officially yours. Every single brick." He walked back to the table, handing a glass to Meredith and one to Garrick. They raised them high, the crystal clinking with a bright, sickening ring of triumph. Boyd looked down at me, his eyes dead, his lip curling into a final dismissive sneer. He took a sip of his champagne, then deliberately tilted his wrist, letting a few sticky drops of the expensive wine splash onto the carpet right next to my scuffed shoe. "And as for you, Sloane," he said, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling growl of pure malice, "you just signed your own financial death warrant. You're officially broke. Pack your bags, take your $100,000 and get the hell out of our sight. You're nothing but a ghost in this town now." I sat perfectly still. I didn't reach for the cashier's check on the table. I just watched the white foam from his champagne slowly dissolve into the gray wool fibers of the carpet. The clock on the wall read 3:52 p.m. 8 minutes left. The bubbles in Boyd's crystal flute died down, leaving a thin, sticky ring of foam against the glass. For a long 30 seconds, the only sound in the room was the low, steady drone of the HVAC system, and the distant, muffled honking of traffic down on Dallas Executive Airport Way. I didn't pick up the cashier's check. I didn't reach for my cane. Instead, I slid my hand into the pocket of my oversized sweatshirt. I pulled out a small blue pack of industrial oil-removing wet wipes, the kind my father's mechanics used at the fleet yard. I pulled one out. The sharp, clean scent of isopropyl alcohol immediately cut through the heavy perfume of Meredith's Chanel and the stale yeast of the champagne. Slowly, deliberately, I pressed the wet cloth to my face. I wiped away the dark gray eyeshadow I had smeared beneath my lower lids. I wiped away the fake tear tracks dried on my cheeks. I straightened my spine, shifting my weight back until my shoulders squared against the leather of the chair. The submissive, trembling slump was gone. Meredith stopped her glass halfway to her mouth, her manicured brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing as she watched me change before her eyes. "What the hell are you doing, Sloane? Get your check and leave. We're finished here." I didn't look at her. My eyes were locked on the digital atomic clock, built into the walnut paneling above Boyd's head. 3:58 p.m. "Garrick," I said, My voice wasn't high or breathless anymore. It was low, flat, and carried the exact gravelly resonance of my father's when he was about to foreclose on a debtor. Do me a favor. Use that expensive remote on the sideboard. Turn the television to Bloomberg, Texas or Fox Business. Garrick didn't move. He stood by the window, his jaw tightening, his thumb nervously spinning his new Rolex. Why would I do anything you say, Gimp? Boyd, get security up here. Now. Boyd reached for his desk phone, his fingers hovering over the intercom button. But something in my expression made him pause. A seasoned transactional lawyer survives on paranoia. He recognizes the shift in tone when a negotiation stops being a surrender and becomes an ambush. Wait, Garrick, Boyd murmured, his eyes dropping to the signed copies of Gabe Mitchell's contract sitting under the heavy brass paperweight. Sloane, what did you do? Turn it on, Thaddeus, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the marble. It's 4 o'clock. You don't want to miss the opening bell. 3:59 p.m. Boyd picked up the heavy silver remote himself. He aimed it at the 80-inch recessed monitor on the wall. The screen flickered to life, showing the standard scrolling ticker of the Texas energy sector, then immediately cut to a live press briefing room in downtown Dallas. The blue banner across the bottom read, EPA Region 6 Emergency Enforcement Action. At the podium stood Marcus Vance, no relation to us, the regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, flanked by 2 men in dark suits with federal gold badges pinned to their lapels. Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Division. Good afternoon, the administrator said, his voice dropping through the high-definition speakers with chilling clarity. Effective at 4 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time today, the United States government has issued an immediate, non-negotiable administrative order under Section 106 of CERCLA, commonly known as the Superfund Act. Meredith set her glass down with a sharp clink. Thaddeus, what is this? Why are we watching this garbage? Shoo, Boyd hissed. A thin line of sweat had just broken through the expensive matte foundation near his temples. This order places an immediate federal lien and environmental freeze on the 50-acre commercial parcel known as the Vance Port Terminal Tract, located at Sector 4, Port of Houston. The administrator continued, flipping through a sheaf of papers. Recent deep core testing has confirmed massive, unchecked migration of a subterranean chemical plume, consisting of dense non-aqueous phase liquids, specifically benzene and trichloroethylene. This contamination stems from illegal deep well injection practices conducted during the 1980s by former tenants. Garrick took 2 steps away from the window, his face losing its bourbon-induced flush, turning a sickly translucent gray. The Houston tract. That's our deal. That's the $30 million sale to Intermodal Global. The plume has officially compromised the municipal aquifer boundary, the federal administrator said, his voice flat, procedural and lethal. Under the provisions of joint and several liability, the EPA is ordering an immediate cessation of all transfer activities. The estimated cost for groundwater extraction, thermal desorption and soil stabilization is currently appraised at $45 million. The room went completely airless. Furthermore, the administrator's voice grew even colder, due to the discovery of falsified environmental compliance certificates submitted under the name of the owning entity. The Department of Justice has initiated a parallel criminal grand jury investigation for hazardous waste concealment. Immediate freeze orders have been placed on all bank accounts, secondary assets, and corporate reserves associated with the managing trustees of the Vance Family Trust. The television screen flickered, returning to a commercial for a luxury truck, but nobody in the room was breathing. Then Garrick's phone exploded. The ringtone was loud, shrill, and frantic. He fumbled with the leather case, his slick fingers almost dropping it onto the floor. He pressed it to his ear. Hello? Yes, Mr. Vance. No, wait, let me explain. We could hear the screaming from 3 feet away. It was the lead acquisition attorney for Intermodal Global. Even without the speakerphone, the words fraud, material misrepresentation, and $10 million breach of contract suit sliced through the quiet office. The line went dead with a brutal digital beep. Thaddeus! Meredith shrieked, her perfect posture shattering as she lunged across the marble table, her pearls catching on the edge of a folder. Thaddeus, do something. We just signed the papers. Tell them the sale is void. Tell them we don't want the Houston tract. Boyd didn't look at her. His hands were shaking so violently, he couldn't get his gold Montblanc pen back into his pocket. He grabbed Gabe Mitchell's 4-page property swap agreement, his thumbs tearing the yellow sticky notes as he flipped frantically to Section 9. Clause B. Boyd whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. His eyes raced back and forth across the small type print Gabe had formatted so carefully. No. This can't be. Read it out loud, Thaddeus, I said. I stood up. I didn't use the cane for support. I picked it up by the neck, holding the aluminum shaft like a riding crop against my thigh. My right leg ached a deep, gnawing grind behind the kneecap, but I stood straight. Let Meredith hear what $3,000 an hour bought her. Boyd dropped the papers onto the marble. He looked at Meredith, his eyes wide, completely hollowed out by professional ruin. She gushed us. The contract specifically states that the Vance Trust, under your sole signature, Meredith, assumes all historical, operational and latent liabilities, environmental or otherwise, from the origin of the tract to perpetuity. And Clause C. Boyd's voice dropped to a choked rattle. It contains an explicit waiver of corporate limitation. You signed away your right to use bankruptcy protection for this asset. It attaches to your personal assets, your houses, your personal bank accounts, your cars. What? Garrick roared, slamming his fists onto the table. We just gave her the $100,000. We took everything else. She's the one who's supposed to be broke. The $100,000 is already gone, Garrick, I said, tapping my cane once against the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Gabe Mitchell filed the electronic deed registration with Terrell County at exactly 3:55 p.m. The property is in my name. And the $100,000? It's currently clearing the outstanding tax liens on my grandfather's sand. I pulled a second document from my canvas tote. A clean, crisp corporate letterhead, bearing the blue and gold seal of Vanguard Battery Materials. At 4:01 p.m., Vanguard finalized a 99-year mineral rights lease on that 200 acres of worthless desert dirt for $85 million, I said, my voice cutting through their panic like an ice pick. The funds are currently sitting in an unfreezable, anonymous blind trust under my sole control. My father knew about the lithium, Garrick. He kept the core samples in his private lockbox because he knew you and your mother would try to sell the company the minute his heart slowed down. He left me the sand because he knew I was the only one who knew how to dig. Meredith sank back into her chair, her face a pale, frozen mask of horror, her fingers clutching her throat so tightly the pearls looked like they were choking her. Boyd looked down at his desk, at the spilled champagne that was now dripping onto his $5,000 custom Italian shoes. He knew what was coming. For an attorney in Texas, an EPA criminal indictment means the end of your license, the loss of your home, and a minimum of 8 years in a federal penitentiary with no parole. I picked up my canvas bag and adjusted the strap over my shoulder. I limped toward the double mahogany doors, my boot making that same old scritch thud against the carpet. But this time nobody laughed. At the door I paused. I didn't look back at the broken lawyer or the greedy heirs who had tried to steal my father's life. I just looked at the green champagne bottle rolling slowly across the Carrara marble floor, leaking its last flat bubbles into the rug. Enjoy the wine, Thaddeus, I said softly. It's the last thing you're going to taste that doesn't taste like federal salt. The doors glided open on their silent, oiled tracks, and I walked out into the cool, clean Texas afternoon. The lobby of the Preston Center was quiet. The marble beneath my boots didn't vibrate, but the air outside felt different, heavy with the humidity of a Texas summer storm rolling in from the east. I leaned my hand against the cold brass rail of the exit doors, waiting. Exactly 4 minutes later, 3 unmarked black Ford Explorers pulled into the fire lane, their tires screeching softly against the concrete. 6 men in dark suits with federal lanyards stepped out. They didn't rush. They moved with the terrifying bureaucratic precision of the federal government. I watched the glass elevator carry them straight up to the 16th floor. I sat in my old SUV across the street, the engine idling rough. I watched through the tinted windshield as they brought them down. Thaddeus Boyd came out first. His hands were uncuffed, but a tall, broad-shouldered agent held him firmly by the elbow. Boyd's $3,000 suit jacket was draped over his wrists to hide the steel. His face wasn't red anymore. It was the color of skim milk. His eyes were fixed on the asphalt, his mouth moving in a silent, frantic rehearsal of a defense he knew wouldn't work. Then came Meredith. The Chanel dress looked wrinkled now. She had lost a shoe in the elevator. The expensive cream pump was missing, leaving her limping on one bare, nylon-covered foot. Her lace veil was torn. She was screaming at the cameras that had suddenly appeared from the local news vans, her manicured hands clawing at the air until an agent shoved her into the back seat of the second Explorer. Garrick was last. He wasn't screaming. He was weeping like a child, his head pressed against his knees as they forced him into the cage. The legal machinery of Texas doesn't stall once the federal government takes the wheel. The grand jury took less than 48 hours to return a true bill. Indictments for conspiracy, wire fraud, and felony violations of the Clean Water Act. Because of Section 9, Clause B of Gabe Mitchell's contract, the EPA didn't touch Vance Development's remaining assets. They went straight for the managing officer's personal wealth. Every single penny. The Highland Park mansion went on the auction block 3 weeks later. I stood across the street on the public sidewalk, watching the movers carry out the custom Italian furniture, the vintage wine collection, and my mother's diamond rings. The estate was liquidated to pay the initial $5 million civil assessment for the Houston aquifer containment. The rest of their personal accounts, amounting to roughly $12 million, were seized under federal forfeiture laws. It didn't even cover a third of the $45 million Superfund cleanup bill. They were bankrupt before they even checked into the holding facility in Seagoville. 2 months ago, the federal judge in the Northern District handed down the sentences. Thaddeus Boyd got 9 years. No parole in the federal system. He'll be nearly 70 when he sees daylight, his reputation erased, his bar license permanently revoked. Meredith and Garrick each took 12 years for their roles in the falsified compliance certificates and the fraudulent transfer. Garrick will spend his 30s eating off tin trays in a medium security cell. The Rolex he took from my father's wrist now sits in a federal evidence locker in Fort Worth. As for me, I didn't stay in Dallas to watch them rot. I took $40,000 from my Vanguard lithium advance and flew to Zurich. A private orthopedic specialist spent 7 hours rebuilding my right femoral head and replacing the shattered cartilage in my knee. It took 4 months of agonizing physical therapy, of screaming into a leather towel in a cold clinic room, but yesterday morning, I walked 3 miles along the lake. Without a cane, without a limp. The remaining $84 million sits in a clean, conservative trust account managed by an old money firm in Austin. Every cent of the interest goes to the Gideon Vance Foundation for Traumatic Recovery. We buy prosthetics, fund surgeries, and retain top-tier legal counsel for victims of violent accidents whose families have turned their backs on them. Long ago, my father told me that money isn't a scorecard. It's a shovel. You can use it to build a foundation, or you can use it to dig your own grave. Meredith and Garrick thought they were digging my grave with that barren patch of West Texas sand. They just didn't realize how deep the hole was until they fell in. The sun is setting over the Colorado River now, casting a long amber glow across my new office. The desk is clean. No mahogany. Just solid, unvarnished Texas oak. If this story proved anything to you, it's that justice isn't a loud room or a shouting match. It's the quiet stroke of a pen. If you believe that true justice belongs to those who have the patience to fight for it, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this story. Let the world know that out here, the fine print always wins.